everyone. Nice to have you back. Today I'm going to tell you a story. Now, who doesn't like a good story? Since this is an Anglo-Saxon epic, it reflects Anglo-Saxon values. First of all, loyalty. Loyalty to the king, loyalty to your family, to your kin, that means your extended family, your clan, your tribe. And of course, we're talking about our hero, Beowulf. A hero should be physically strong, have courage, and be successful in battle. Love is not really an Anglo-Saxon value, at least not romantic love. Rather, there's a focus on brotherly love, fraternità, and support for your clan and your family. Our hero is Beowulf, and at the beginning of the story, he's a young man, and he comes from the kingdom of the Gates. His uncle is the king of the Gates, and his name is Hygelac. Then there is King Hrothgar, the king of the Danes, so where the country of Denmark is today. Hrothgar was a great warrior in his youth, but now he's getting on in years. He's a good and generous king, and all of his people like him. One of King Hrothgar's greatest warriors is named Unferth. So those are the humans. There are 3 terrible monsters in this story, but there's only one in part 1. But don't worry, he's horrible and violent and twisted. And for now, one monster is more than enough. And that monster, of course, is Grendel. Now, Grendel is a lonely outcast, and he gets angry and jealous when other people are enjoying life. So he kills them. He's a psychopath. He's a sociopath. Grendel is pure evil. In the poem, it says that he is a descendant of Cain. Do you remember the Bible story? In Italian, Caino e Abele? Well, maybe the idea that Grendel is related to Cain, maybe that was added to the original pagan story by the 2 Christian scribes who wrote down the story. You remember that? So let's get started with the story. King Hrothgar was the king of the Danes. He was a great and mighty king. He won many battles, so he was a rich king, and he was also generous with his subjects, the people of Denmark. King Hrothgar decided to build a big, beautiful hall called Herot. Here he could hold great feasts. His people could eat together and celebrate their victories. And it is called a mead hall. Scandinavia is too far north to grow grapes and make wine, so the Danes drank mead, which is an alcoholic drink made from fermenting honey. When the hall was finished, King Hrothgar gave a great feast. There was singing and music, and storytellers called shops provided the entertainment. And there was wonderful food. And of course, there was a lot to drink. It was a wonderful party. Well, it was an epic party. People drank too much, I'm sorry to tell you, and they fell asleep without thinking about guarding the door to the hall. Now, during the great feast, the sound of the party was heard throughout the land, even in the faraway swamps and bogs below Herot Hall. In the swamp, there lived a horrible monster called Grendel. He was a distant relative of Cain, and like Cain, he was a murderer. Grendel was enraged by the joyous sound of the party. So Grendel came to Herot Hall, and he crept into the hall, and he carried off 30 of the sleeping men. He ate them and left only bits and pieces of their bloody, dead bodies for their friends to find the next morning. The people were terrified, of course. And the next night, the same thing happened, and the monster killed and ate the guards as well as the people sleeping inside the hall. King Hrothgar was very sad, of course, and he also felt powerless against the monster Grendel. He was no longer a young man, and even his best warriors were being killed by Grendel. And no one wanted to come to his great mead hall, Herod. They were all scared of the monster. Now this terrible situation continued for 12 long years. Stories, poems, and songs were written about the terrible monster, and finally these stories reached the faraway kingdom of the Gates, in what is now called Sweden. King Hygelac, the king of the Gates, decided to help the people of Denmark, so he built a warship and sent 14 brave young warriors to help King Hrothgar in his fight against Grendel. The biggest and best one of the warriors was a young man named Beowulf. When the warship landed, the warriors were taken to the great mead hall Herod. Beowulf introduced himself to King Hrothgar. No one knew him, so Beowulf told long stories of what a great warrior he was and how wonderful his family was. Now to us, these days, he would sound quite arrogant, as he boasted about how great he was, and also about the incredible battles he had won. But back then, boasting was quite normal. Now it turns out that King Hrothgar knew King Hygelac, and he had heard of Beowulf, so he made him welcome in Herod Hall. He was very excited when he heard Beowulf wanted to fight Grendel. He warned him that Grendel was very strong and fierce and evil, and that he had killed some of Hrothgar's finest young warriors. Beowulf told Hrothgar that yes, perhaps he would lose the battle, perhaps Grendel would kill him, but he was not afraid. In fact, Beowulf would take off his armor and his helmet, and he would not use a sword. He would fight Grendel with his bare hands. Now one of King Hrothgar's men, named Unferth, thought that perhaps Beowulf was exaggerating in his boasting. Maybe he was a bit jealous, too, that this foreigner had come and claimed the attention of the king with all of this boasting. In the end, though, Unferth decided to wait and see what the morning would bring. King Hrothgar and his people were really happy that Beowulf had come, and in the tradition of the time they had a great feast in the hall to celebrate Beowulf's coming and his hopes of victory. And once again everyone drank too much mead, but not Beowulf. When everyone else fell asleep, drunk in the great mead hall, Beowulf lay down to wait, but he only pretended to sleep. Grendel returned to Herod Hall that night with hatred in his heart, again enraged by the sound of the joy within the hall. Grendel quickly grabbed one by the fire and ripped off his head with his teeth. Beowulf sprang up and jumped on the monster, and their fight was fierce and long and bloody. Beowulf's men woke up and took out their swords, but swords were useless against the magic monster. Beowulf was left to fight Grendel alone. Grendel was ferocious and extremely strong. However, Beowulf was also strong. He grabbed Grendel's arm and twisted it and pulled and ripped it off. Grendel screamed in rage and pain, and blood gushed out. It was a fatal wound. Everyone could see that Grendel would die from the injury, but the monster managed to run away to die back at his bog. The next morning, King Hrothgar and the whole kingdom were overjoyed. The monster had been defeated. Grendel was dead. And of course, there was a party that night in Herod. Not only did the Danes want to celebrate Beowulf's triumphant victory over Grendel, they now felt safe after 12 years of being afraid. Grendel was dead and gone. Herod Hall was again the center of the Danes' community, and Beowulf had done a great thing. Even Unferth had to admit that Beowulf was a great warrior. And King Hrothgar, of course, was very happy. He gave great riches to Beowulf and told him that he was like a son to him. The Danes were happy and singing songs of bravery around the fire. The Geats were sad because one of their warriors had been slaughtered by Grendel. But they all shared in the glory of Beowulf, and they all received gifts from King Hrothgar. As a symbol of the victory over Grendel, the monster's arm was hung in the great hall of Herod. Scifo, we would say now. How unsanitary! A great bloody arm hanging from the ceiling. But at that time in history, triumph in battle, victory over evil, physical supremacy, and loyalty were the most important things. And so it was an epic evening for everyone in the hall. They drank mead and told stories throughout the night, and finally fell asleep, happy and warm and safe in the great hall, below the shadow of the great bloody arm. What do you think happened next? Tune in next time.